Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going to untangle a crime that is just truly jarring and honestly meticulously calculated. It all starts in Dallas, Texas, in a neighborhood known as Uptown. Now, if you know Uptown, you know it's a pretty upscale world, right? We're talking expensive apartments, fancy restaurants. It's the kind of place where violent crime just isn't on the radar. But on one particular night, the piece of the Gables Park 17 parking garage was completely shattered. We're going to map out exactly how what looked like a normal love triangle somehow devolved into a horrific execution-style murder, and how detectives literally had to navigate through an absolute labyrinth of lies to finally get to the truth.
To really understand the stark contrast of this event, you just have to listen to the terrified 911 call from that night. The caller said, "All I heard was screaming and then a loud pop, and then I saw her laying on the floor. The scene was a nightmare. Blood, a dropped phone, a car door left wide open. The victim had been parked for merely 2 seconds before someone stepped out of a nearby Jeep Cherokee and ended her life." So when Dallas homicide detective Eric Barnes gets the call, his very first thought is, a robbery gone wrong. Happens all the time. But as the pieces started clicking into place, it became super clear that this was no random act of desperation. No, this was a highly targeted assassination.
What makes this case so chilling is the absolute night-and-day contrast between the victim and the primary suspect. On one hand, you have Kendra Hatcher. She was a pediatric dentist, an all-American beauty, a former high school cheer captain, and a deeply devoted Christian. Just beloved by literally everyone who crossed her path. And then, on the other hand, we have Brenda Delgado. She was the ex-girlfriend of Kendra's new boyfriend, Dr. Ricky Panagua. Now, when Detective Barnes brought Brenda in for questioning, her whole vibe was incredibly off. Usually murder suspects are super guarded, right? Maybe a little sweaty, nervous. But Brenda? She's sitting there wrapping herself in cozy blankets, acting exceedingly friendly and actively trying to bond with the detective over their shared religion. She even points out a Christian volunteer bracelet he's wearing. She played the role of the sweet, innocent girl flawlessly.
And that innocent act, it was backed up by what looked like an absolutely airtight alibi. When they asked where she was during the murder, she calmly explained she'd been at the library studying for her dental technician's license from noon until 6, and then went to grab dinner at a Chili's. And she didn't just have a story, she brought receipts. Literally, she had the time-stamped receipts sitting right at the very top of her wallet, ready to hand over. But here's where it gets even more suspicious. When police showed her grainy surveillance footage of the suspect's Jeep Cherokee, she voluntarily, without even blinking, identified her friend Crystal as the person who had borrowed that exact vehicle. She was practically serving her own friend up on a silver platter, just to steer the detective's attention away from herself.
Now, the pace of this investigation was just staggering. We are talking warp speed here. Within the first hour, police pulled that grainy CCTV of the Jeep. By hour 12, an auto mechanic calls the tip line to say, "Hey, I actually loaned that exact Jeep to Brenda Delgado because her car was in the shop." Boom, things are starting to line up for Detective Barnes. Fast forward to hour 24, and he's got Brenda and her friend Crystal in separate interrogation rooms. Crystal's story is shifting all over the place. She's a pathological liar, making up wild stories about a masked man forcing her to drive. Eventually, Barnes corners Brenda, essentially calling her out as the mastermind. But prosecutors say there just isn't enough hard evidence to legally hold her yet, so they keep her briefly on some old traffic tickets, but tragically, she gets released. And within 48 hours of that interrogation, Brenda Delgado vanishes. She flees across the border to Mexico, eventually becoming one of the very few women in American history to land on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
So, with the supposed mastermind in the wind, detectives had to pivot. They shifted their entire focus to finding the actual shooter. First up, Detective Barnes digs into the phone records and finds a common number shared by both Brenda and Crystal. Crystal finally caves and confirms the number belongs to the gunman, a small-time marijuana dealer named Christopher Love. They bring Love in and they grill him for over 20 hours, but he denies the whole thing. He even claims he doesn't mess with guns. But then, an absolute stroke of luck changes the entire game. Love's car had been impounded, right? Police did an initial search and came up empty, but an ATF explosive-smelling dog named Titan just happened to be at the auto pound that day for a totally unrelated demonstration. They decide, hey, let's run Titan past Love's car. And sure enough, the dog leads them straight to the murder weapon, perfectly stashed away underneath the passenger side center console. Just like that, they had their shooter.
When the detectives finally stepped back and mapped out this entire conspiracy, the roles they uncovered were chillingly clear. Sitting right at the top, you have Brenda Delgado as the mastermind. Her motive? Pure extreme envy and jealousy. She was absolutely furious that her ex-boyfriend Ricky was moving on. And get this, she planned the hit for the exact night before Ricky and Kendra were supposed to fly out to Cancun for a romantic vacation.
Then you've got Christopher Love, the shooter. His payout was a promised lifetime supply of cocaine and drugs. The guy literally thought this hit was his ticket to becoming the next big drug kingpin in Dallas. And finally, Crystal Cortez, the getaway driver. Do you want to know her payout? A mere $500. $500 because she needed money to feed her son. It really highlights the deeply disturbing, incredibly cheap price they put on a human life.
But look, the depth of Brenda's psychotic jealousy goes way, way further than just hiring a hitman. In a truly terrifying reminder of how vulnerable our digital lives are, police discovered she was running a massive secret spy operation. That sweet Christian librarian facade? A total fake. She had secretly hacked into Ricky's iCloud, literally reading his texts and monitoring his phone calls in real time. Ricky later testified that he kept running into her on his jogging paths and even at his salsa dancing lessons. He thought it was just a funny coincidence. It definitely wasn't. And during the trial, prosecutors dropped a bombshell. Brenda had formulated other incredibly dark plots before this. She had actually asked her cousin Moses to put Ricky in a coma using a baseball bat. And if that's not crazy enough, she asked her roommate Jennifer to inject Kendra in the back of the neck with a needle. She was just fiercely determined to eliminate her rival no matter what it took.
Fast forward to the trial of Christopher Love. Crystal Cortez, the getaway driver, ends up taking a plea deal for 35 years and becomes the state's star witness. She basically brought the entire case together for the jury. But one of the most visceral, unforgettable moments of her testimony happened when a reporter bluntly asked her why she would participate in a brutal murder for a measly $500. Crystal just looked at them and coldly replied, "You don't know what it means to be broke, do you?" And to make the whole thing even more unsettling, the prosecution revealed that when Brenda paid Crystal that $500, she had chillingly folded the bills into the shape of a heart. Just wow. It's a really stark look into how Brenda manipulated the desperate people around her to do her dirty work.
Now, when it came to the shooter, the justice system moved with absolutely staggering efficiency. 3 hours. That is literally all it took for the jury to deliberate before finding the unapologetic shooter, Christopher Love, guilty. He was handed the death penalty by lethal injection. See, Love had completely rejected a deal to testify against Brenda. He stayed silent and adamant the whole time, and in doing so, he basically sealed his own fate in record time.
And this brings us to a really complex question, one that completely shocked Kendra's family. Does the law always serve true justice? Because there was a massive legal loophole waiting for Brenda Delgado. After spending 6 months on the run, hiding out in a small town in Mexico, she was finally tracked down, and that was largely thanks to a $100,000 reward on her head. But here is the massive catch. Mexico has a strict extradition treaty policy that completely prohibits the death penalty, period. So in order to get Brenda back to Texas to even stand trial, prosecutors had to agree to take the death penalty off the table entirely. By fleeing across the border, Brenda Delgado had literally saved her own life.
But despite escaping death row, Brenda Delgado couldn't outrun justice forever. Her calculated lies and her defense team's last-ditch effort to blame the whole entire thing on Crystal Cortez completely fell apart in court. The jury saw right through that scholarly, harmless librarian act. In fact, remember how Christopher Love's jury took 3 hours? Brenda Delgado's jury took only 20 minutes. 20 minutes to reach a unanimous verdict. She received a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, meaning she will spend the absolute rest of her natural life behind cold steel bars.
As we wrap this up, I think it's absolutely crucial to ground everything back in the tragic reality of what happened. This quote from Kendra's sister Ashley really says it all. She said, "We didn't know that evil like this existed, full of life and full of love, and just gave everything she had to everybody." Kendra Hatcher was simply a beautiful soul. She was living a bright, happy life, completely unaware that this dark web of obsession was slowly closing in on her. The devastating, permanent impact that this senseless act had on her loved ones is a really heavy reminder of the real human cost at the center of this whole investigation. And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to ponder today. How far can the destructive nature of envy truly push someone? We've seen exactly how a perceived slight, a bad breakup, a new relationship, can fester and mutate into a dark psychology capable of hiring hitmen and orchestrating a brutal murder in a quiet parking garage. It is a terrifying, terrifying look into the extreme edges of human jealousy. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this deep dive helped you understand the chilling mechanics behind the tragic Uptown Dallas case. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.